The lab had no windows. It was buried beneath 12 feet of earth and forgotten by the world, exactly how Dr. Marcus Vane wanted it. His hands, weathered and trembling, held a vial of shimmering liquid that pulsed with a faint golden light. Somewhere above him, news anchors spoke of the collapse, the global crop blight that had already claimed half of Earth's agricultural land and threatened to starve billions within 18 months. And somewhere in his shattered memory lived the voice of a colleague who had once promised to believe in him before she helped destroy everything he built. What Marcus didn't know, as he lifted that glowing vial toward the fluorescent light of his underground sanctuary, was that the answer to humanity's darkest hour had been hiding inside his discredited research all along.
The story of Marcus Vane didn't begin in the darkness of a hidden laboratory. It began in sunlight, 7 years earlier, at the National Institute for Agricultural Sciences in Madison, Wisconsin, a sprawling campus of glass buildings and manicured lawns that hummed with the optimism of discovery. Marcus was 43 then, with salt and pepper hair that always seemed slightly disheveled and wire-rimmed glasses perpetually sliding down his nose. His colleagues called him the dreamer behind his back, though some meant it kindly and others did not. He ran a small but passionate team studying cellular regeneration in plants, exploring whether damaged crops could heal themselves through targeted genetic stimulation. The work was unconventional. The funding was always tenuous, but Marcus believed, truly believed, that his research could one day feed millions. His closest collaborator was Dr. Elena Castillo, a brilliant molecular biologist 15 years his junior, who had joined his lab as a postdoctoral researcher and never left. Elena had sharp, dark eyes that missed nothing and a laugh that could fill the entire third floor of the research building. She challenged Marcus constantly, questioned his methods openly, and stayed late with him 3 nights a week, refining experiments until the campus lights flickered off. "You're trying to make plants do something unnatural," Elena said one evening, leaning over a microscope. The specimen beneath the lens was a wheat stalk they had deliberately damaged with a fungal toxin. She pointed to the cellular wall. "See this? The regeneration you're triggering is unstable. It won't last." Marcus pulled up a chair beside her. The smell of coffee permeated the lab, stale and comforting. "What if stability isn't the point? What if we trigger the regeneration long enough for the plant to produce seeds? The next generation could carry forward whatever repairs we initiate." Elena shook her head, but she was smiling. "You're asking me to redefine everything we know about hereditary traits and monocots. I'm asking you to imagine what's possible." She looked at him for a long moment. In the pale blue glow of the monitor behind them, her expression softened. "Okay, Marcus, let's imagine." For 3 more years, they imagined together. They published papers that were cautiously received. They presented at conferences where Marcus's ideas were labeled provocative by generous reviewers and reckless by skeptical ones. They fought for grants that arrived in smaller amounts each cycle. And somewhere in the long hours and shared frustrations, something deeper grew between them, an unspoken understanding that neither was willing to name. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday in late October. Marcus remembered it with painful clarity, the amber light of sunset streaming through the lab windows, Elena's gasp as she analyzed the data from their latest trial. "It's working," she whispered. Her hands were shaking. "Marcus, look at this. The regeneration is stabilizing. The second-generation seeds are carrying the modified traits." He crossed the room in 3 strides, nearly knocking over a tray of petri dishes. The numbers on the screen were unmistakable. Their wheat samples, deliberately blighted, deliberately broken, had healed themselves and passed that healing capability to their offspring. "We did it," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "We actually did it." Elena turned to face him. She was crying, though she wouldn't have admitted it. What do we do now? The answer should have been simple. Publish the findings, secure more funding, begin the long road toward practical application, but Marcus had never been patient. He saw the potential of their discovery stretching outward like ripples in a pond, a world where crop failures could be reversed, where famine could become a relic of history. "We go to the board," he said. "Tomorrow, we ask for an accelerated trial." Elena's expression flickered with concern. "Marcus, the data is strong, but it's not complete. We need at least another 6 months of—" 6 months? He took her hands in his, an unusual gesture that surprised them both. "Elena, people are hungry now. The drought in East Africa is destroying everything. We can't wait." She pulled back gently, folding her arms across her chest. "That's exactly why we have to be careful. If we rush this and something goes wrong, we lose credibility. We lose the chance to help anyone." But Marcus had already made up his mind. The next morning, he presented their preliminary findings to the Institute's oversight board without Elena's knowledge. He described the regeneration process, the hereditary transmission, the vast implications for global food security. His passion was evident. His preparation was incomplete. Dr. Harold Sinclair, the Institute's director, listened with steepled fingers and an expression Marcus couldn't read. Sinclair was a careful man who valued process over progress, reputation over risk. "You're asking us to endorse human trials based on 3 successful plant generations?" Sinclair said when Marcus finished. "I'm asking you to let us continue the research with adequate funding, to take this seriously. And what does Dr. Castillo think of this presentation?" Marcus hesitated. That hesitation would cost him everything. Sinclair discovered that Elena hadn't been consulted. He interviewed her separately and found a scientist more cautious than her partner, a woman who admitted the data was promising but premature. When the board convened the following week, they didn't just deny Marcus's funding request, they ordered a full audit of his laboratory practices. The audit found irregularities, sample documentation that was incomplete, protocols that had been modified without proper authorization. None of it was intentional wrongdoing. Marcus was disorganized, not dishonest. But in the harsh light of institutional scrutiny, disorganization looked like deception. Elena tried to defend him. She wrote letters, she requested meetings, but the machinery of academic reputation had already begun its grinding work, and Marcus was caught beneath its wheels. "I didn't betray you, Elena," she said on the day he cleaned out his office. Rain streaked the windows, cardboard boxes littered the floor. "I have to believe that." He didn't look at her. He placed a framed photo, the two of them at a conference in Copenhagen, smiling beneath an October sky, into the nearest box. "You told them I wasn't ready." "I told them the truth." "The truth," he laughed bitterly. "The truth is that I was right, Elena. That data was real, and now it's going to sit in a filing cabinet while people starve." She reached for his arm, but he pulled away. "Marcus, please, we can try again, in time." Time. He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her step back. "That's the one thing we don't have." He left Madison that afternoon. The scientific community, with its long memory and short patience, quickly forgot Dr. Marcus Vane. His published papers gathered citations only in dismissive footnotes. His colleagues moved on to safer research. The woman who had worked beside him for 7 years eventually accepted a position at a university in California, where she built a quiet career and tried not to think about the man who had once asked her to imagine the impossible. And Marcus? Marcus vanished into the silent spaces where broken dreams go to die. 7 years passed. The world, in its slow and terrible way, proved Marcus Vane right. The blight arrived without warning in the spring of 2024. First, reports emerged from agricultural regions in Ukraine, entire wheat fields turning brown overnight, stalks collapsing as if some invisible hand had switched off their will to live. Scientists initially suspected a new strain of fungus, but laboratory analysis revealed something far more alarming: a parasitic organism that attacked the cellular regeneration mechanisms of plants themselves. Crops couldn't heal, they couldn't adapt, they could only die. Within 6 months, the blight had spread to North America, South America, and Southeast Asia. It jumped between species with terrifying efficiency, devastating corn, rice, soybeans, and barley. Governments declared emergencies. Food prices tripled, then quintupled. Grocery stores implemented rationing. Farmers watched their livelihoods crumble into dust. The scientists called it the collapse. The public called it the end of everything. At the World Agricultural Summit in Geneva, Dr. Harold Sinclair, now a senior advisor to the United Nations, stood before representatives of 40 nations and delivered the grim assessment. Based on current projections, he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words, global food production will fall below sustainable levels within 18 months. We are facing a famine of unprecedented scale. The room erupted in shouted questions, desperate proposals, barely concealed panic. Sinclair waited for silence before continuing. Our best researchers are working on solutions, but I must be honest with you, we do not yet have an answer. Far from the polished conference rooms of Geneva, in a farmhouse on 40 acres of neglected land in rural Vermont, a woman named Rosie Pemberton watched the same news broadcast on a television set that was older than her truck. Rosie was 67, with hands calloused by decades of honest work and eyes that held equal measures of stubbornness and kindness. She'd inherited the farm from her parents and had refused every offer to sell it, even when the soil went sour and the bank letters grew threatening. Now, watching the announcer describe the blight, she poured herself a glass of whiskey and wondered if her stubbornness had finally run out of road. The knock on her door came at sunset. She opened it to find a man she didn't recognize, thin, gray-bearded, wearing clothes that had seen better decades. He held a worn leather satchel in one hand and nothing in the other. "Mrs. Pemberton?" His voice was rougher than she expected, as if he hadn't used it in a while. "My name's Marcus Vane. I'm a scientist, or I used to be." She studied him with the frank appraisal of someone who'd spent a lifetime judging weather and character. "You're the one who answered my notice about the basement." "Yes, ma'am." 3 months earlier, Rosie had posted a classified ad in the local paper. She had a root cellar beneath her barn that she couldn't use anymore, too hard on her knees to climb down the ladder. She'd offered it for rent at a price low enough to attract someone desperate or strange. Marcus Vane was apparently both. "You said you needed a quiet place to work. Didn't say what kind of work." "Research. Personal project." He paused. "I'd need access to electricity and privacy." "Privacy I got plenty of. Electricity costs extra." She looked past him toward the darkening fields. "You planning anything illegal down there?" "No, ma'am. Just trying to fix something I broke a long time ago." There was something in his voice, a weariness that went beyond exhaustion, a sadness that had settled into his bones. Rosie had known that kind of sorrow. She'd felt it when her husband passed, when her daughter moved to the city and stopped calling. Some griefs you carry with you like stones in your pockets, weighing you down until you learn to walk with the extra weight. "Rent's due on the 1st, she said finally. "I don't ask questions, and I expect you won't give me reason to." "Thank you." She handed him a key. "The ladder's tricky, 3rd rung's loose. Don't come crying to me if you break your neck." Marcus Vane descended into the root cellar that night and began rebuilding the laboratory the world had taken from him. Over the following weeks, Rosie observed her strange tenant with careful attention. He emerged once a day to collect supplies: glass containers, electrical components, packets of seeds from a specialty catalog. He spoke little and smiled less. But she noticed that he always thanked her when she left food outside the barn door, and that he fixed the broken fence post on the east pasture without being asked. "You're not eating enough," she told him one afternoon, blocking his path to the barn. She thrust a ceramic bowl into his hands. "Potato soup, my grandmother's recipe. It's getting cold out." Marcus looked at the bowl, as if he'd forgotten what kindness felt like. "I'm not much for company." "Didn't ask for your company, asked you to eat." She turned and walked back toward the farmhouse. "There's bread in the kitchen if you want it." That night, Marcus sat at Rosie's kitchen table for the first time. The soup was hot and heavily seasoned, and something in its warmth loosened a knot in his chest that had been tightening for years. Rosie asked no questions. She simply sat across from him, sipping tea, and let the silence be enough. "I used to believe I could change things, make things grow that couldn't grow, fix what was broken." Rosie's eyes flicked toward the window, toward the fields that had yielded nothing but weeds for 3 seasons. "And now?" "Now I'm just trying not to be wrong about one more thing." In his underground laboratory, Marcus worked with the desperate intensity of a man who understood exactly how little time remained. His research from 7 years ago had focused on triggering cellular regeneration in damaged plants. The blight, currently devastating the world's crops, worked by attacking that same regenerative capacity, shutting it down, preventing plants from healing themselves. But what if the process could be reversed? What if a treatment could not merely restore regeneration, but supercharge it, forcing plants to repair faster than the blight could destroy? The theory was sound. The execution was madness. Marcus had no institutional support, no advanced equipment, no peer review. He had glass jars and improvised incubators and the fading notes of research the world had dismissed as dangerous fantasy. And he had something else: a small collection of seeds he'd managed to preserve from his original experiments. Seeds that carried, dormant in their genetic code, the modifications he and Elena had once created together. "You're the last ones," he whispered to them, cupping them in his palm like precious gems. "Don't let me down." The first trial failed. The seed sprouted, developed blight symptoms, and withered within days. Marcus adjusted the formula, recalibrated his instruments, and tried again. Another failure. And another. Meanwhile, the news grew darker. The blight had reached England and Nigeria and Japan. Governments stockpiled emergency reserves. Riots broke out in cities where bread lines stretched for miles. The scientists at Geneva issued increasingly desperate reports and offered no solutions. In Vermont, the November frost arrived early. Marcus worked through the cold, his breath visible in the underground chamber, his hands numbing around the instruments he refused to abandon. And on the night of November 23rd, in the small hours before dawn, something unexpected happened. The latest batch of seedlings, exposed to his newest formulation, grown under conditions he'd modified 3 times in as many days, began to glow. It was faint at first, a shimmer almost too subtle to perceive. But as Marcus watched, the glow intensified, spreading from root to stem to the first unfurling leaves. The plants weren't just surviving, they were thriving.
The glow lasted for 17 hours. Marcus documented every minute of it, his handwriting growing shakier with exhaustion and something that felt dangerously close to hope. The seedlings had not only resisted the blight, they had neutralized it. When he introduced contaminated soil samples to the growing plants, the parasitic organism died within hours. The regeneration process Marcus had designed was not merely functioning, it was functioning aggressively, producing byproducts that were toxic to the blight itself. He had created a cure. But a cure in a root cellar in Vermont meant nothing. The blight was destroying crops across 6 continents. To save the world, Marcus would need to produce his solution at massive scale, distributed to agricultural systems worldwide, and convince the scientific establishment to trust the research of a disgraced failure. He needed help, and there was only one person who might still believe him. Finding Elena Castillo took 3 days. She had left the University of California 2 years earlier for a position at a biotech research firm in Boston. Her public profile was minimal. No social media, limited publications, a life that seemed deliberately quiet. Marcus wrote her a letter. His first attempt ran to 15 pages, a desperate flood of technical data and personal apology. He threw it in the fire and started again. The second version was 3 pages, a summary of his findings, an honest admission of what he'd done wrong 7 years ago, and a single request. I need you to see what I've found. If I'm wrong, tell me. If I'm right, help me prove it. The world is dying, Elena. I can't save it alone. He mailed the letter on December 1st and waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Marcus had grown accustomed to isolation, to the silence of his underground chamber and the company of his failing experiments. But now, with a potential breakthrough in his hands and no way to move forward, the silence became unbearable. Rosie noticed the change in him. He paced the fields at night, muttering to himself. He stopped eating the meals she left outside the barn. When she finally confronted him, he was standing at the edge of her property, staring at the barren horizon. "You look like a man waiting for a miracle or a punishment. Which is it?" "I don't know yet." "Well, while you're figuring it out, come inside. There's a storm coming, and I'm too old to carry your frozen body back to the house." That night, sitting in Rosie's kitchen, Marcus told her everything. The research, the disgrace, the hidden laboratory, the glowing plants that might be the answer to humanity's greatest crisis. Rosie listened without interruption. When she finished, she rose and poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "You're either a genius or a madman," she said, handing him one. "Possibly both." The scientific community chose the second option. "The scientific community doesn't live on my farm. I spent my whole life watching things grow. I know the difference between a weed and a flower, even when they both look like trouble at first glance." Marcus met her eyes. "You believe me?" "I believe you're trying. That's more than most people do." She clinked her glass against his. "To lost causes." The response came on December 12th, not in a letter, but in person.
Marcus was adjusting his incubator settings when he heard the barn door open above him. Footsteps descended the ladder. He turned, expecting Rosie, and found Elena Castillo standing in his makeshift laboratory. She looked older than he remembered, new lines around her eyes, silver threads in her dark hair. But her gaze was the same, sharp, searching, missing nothing. "Your letter was insufficiently detailed," she said. "I came to see for myself." For a long moment, neither of them moved. 7 years of silence stretched between them like a bridge neither had been willing to cross. "You came," Marcus finally said. His voice cracked slightly on the second word. "I came to evaluate your research." She stepped forward, examining the rows of seedlings, the jury-rigged equipment, the notebooks filled with cramped handwriting. "Show me the data." The demonstration took 4 hours. Elena asked questions constantly, probing, challenging, demanding justification for every assumption and methodology. She examined his records with the intensity of someone looking for reasons to disbelieve. When he introduced a sample of blight-contaminated soil to one of his modified seedlings, she leaned in close enough for him to smell her familiar shampoo. The plant cells began their defensive regeneration. The golden glow returned, faint but unmistakable. Elena watched in silence as the blight organism died before her eyes.
"This is impossible," she said quietly. "That's what I thought too." She straightened, pulling off her reading glasses. Her expression was unreadable. "You did this alone? For 7 years?" "I didn't have a choice." "You had a choice, Marcus. You chose to disappear. You chose to stop fighting." The accusation stung because it was true. He had run. He had hidden. He had let his anger and shame become walls that kept the world out. "I know," he said. "I was afraid." "Of what?" "Of being wrong again. Of having hope and watching it destroy everything a second time." Elena set down her glasses. She walked toward him slowly, stopping just outside arm's reach. The golden light from the plants flickered across her face. "You were never wrong," she said. 7 years ago. Your theory was correct. I knew it then. I just wasn't brave enough to fight for you." "Elena, let me finish." She took a breath. "I told the board the truth because I was scared. Scared of what would happen if we moved too fast and failed. Scared of what would happen if we succeeded and everything changed." Her voice wavered. "I've spent 7 years regretting it, wondering what you could have accomplished if I'd stood beside you instead of stepping away." The silence that followed was softer than any that had come before. "You're here now," Marcus said. "I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I'd like to help you save the world." But saving the world, they would soon discover, meant first convincing a world that had already given up hope.
Rosie Pemberton had seen her share of unlikely partnerships. Farmers and bankers, stubborn land and unforgiving weather. But watching Dr. Elena Castillo settle into the spare bedroom of her farmhouse and begin a daily routine of long hours in the underground laboratory was something new entirely. "You two got history," Rosie observed, setting plates of breakfast on the kitchen table one morning. "The kind that leaves marks." Elena accepted the coffee Rosie poured without meeting her eyes. "We worked together. A long time ago." "Mm-hmm." Rosie slid a jar of honey across the table. "That man's been carrying something heavy since the day he arrived. Seems a little lighter now." Elena said nothing, but she didn't deny it. The days that followed were a blur of scientific urgency. Marcus and Elena worked in tandem, their old rhythms returning with surprising ease. She refined his methodology, he explained the improvisations necessity had forced upon him. Together, they documented every aspect of the treatment process, the exact formulation of the regeneration catalyst, the optimal application timing, the evidence of blight neutralization across multiple plant species. The results were consistent, extraordinary, undeniable. "We need to go public," Elena said on Christmas Eve. Snow was falling outside, muffling the world in white silence. Rosie's farm looked almost peaceful, despite the crisis consuming the globe beyond its borders. "This data is solid. If we can get it to the right people—" "The right people threw me out 7 years ago," Marcus interrupted. He was hunched over a microscope, avoiding her gaze. "7 years ago, we didn't have proof. We have proof now." "We have proof that works in a basement in Vermont." He finally looked up. "You know what Sinclair will say. He'll call it unverified, unscientific, the ravings of a discredited researcher." "Then we go over his head. The UN is coordinating global response efforts. We contact them directly. And how do we get an audience? I'm a ghost, Elena. I don't exist to these people anymore." She pulled out her phone. "But I'm not a ghost. I have colleagues, connections, people who will listen." The call she made that night reached Dr. Amara Okonkwo, a Nigerian agricultural scientist serving on the UN's Emergency Food Security Task Force. Amara had been Elena's mentor during a fellowship in Lagos 2 decades earlier, a fierce advocate for unconventional solutions who had spent her career fighting institutional inertia. You're calling me on Christmas Eve about a miracle cure developed by a blacklisted scientist in a Vermont basement, Amara said, her voice crackling slightly over the international connection. You understand how that sounds? I understand perfectly, Elena replied. I also understand that current projections give us 12 months before famine becomes unavoidable. What do we have to lose? A long pause. Then, send me everything you have, every data point, every observation. I'll review it personally. Marcus sent the files at 3 a.m. By sunrise, Amara had responded with a single sentence. This changes everything. I'm coming to see it myself. Dr. Amara Okonkwo arrived in Vermont on New Year's Day, accompanied by 2 junior researchers from the task force and a barely concealed skepticism that hardened every line of her face. She was 71 years old, walked with a cane carved from Nigerian blackwood, and spoke with an authority that made the cramped root cellar feel like a United Nations chamber. Show me, she said, before Marcus could offer any introduction. He showed her. The seedlings, the blight neutralization, the golden regeneration glow that intensified each time the plants encountered the parasitic organism. Amara watched it all without expression. When the demonstration concluded, she turned to her junior researchers. Clear the room. They left. Elena hesitated at the ladder. You two, Dr. Castillo, I need to speak with Dr. Vane alone. When they were alone, Amara moved closer to Marcus. Her eyes were ancient and knowing. 7 years ago, I served on a review panel that considered your original research, she said. I argued in your favor. I was outvoted. I didn't know. You weren't meant to. The committee sealed their deliberations. She reached out and touched one of the glowing seedlings with surprising gentleness. I have always believed that scientific progress requires courage. The willingness to be wrong publicly, to fail visibly, to persist anyway. The people who dismissed you lacked that courage. They saw risk where they should have seen possibility. And now? Now I see possibility. She straightened, her expression hardening with resolve. But we face a problem. The UN will not authorize global distribution based on research conducted in a basement. We need institutional validation. We need trials, documentation, independent verification. All the bureaucratic obstacles your work deserves to transcend, but cannot. How long? Months. Perhaps a year. We don't have a year. I know. Amara's gaze drifted toward the ladder, toward the world above. Which is why we will have to take a different approach, an approach that may cost us everything, or give us the chance to save everyone. She outlined her plan. It was audacious, it was risky. It required returning to the exact institutions that had destroyed Marcus's career and demanding not forgiveness, but action. The World Agricultural Summit reconvenes in Geneva in 3 weeks. Representatives from every major nation will be there. If we can demonstrate your research before that assembly, publicly, irrefutably, they will have no choice but to act. You want me to walk into the same room with Sinclair and the people who ruined me? I want you to walk into that room and prove them wrong. Marcus looked at the seedlings, his final experiment, his last desperate hope. They glowed softly in the artificial light, unaware of the weight they carried. I'll need Elena. I assume so. You'll also need me, and you'll need something else. What? Faith. That the people who failed you once are capable of changing. That the world can still surprise you with grace. Marcus thought of Rosie and her grandmother's soup, of Elena and her trembling hands, of 7 years of silence and the first dawn of something that felt like redemption. The World Agricultural Summit convened in the Palais des Nations on a gray January morning. Outside, protesters gathered with signs proclaiming various predictions about the end of civilization. Inside, diplomats and scientists exchanged polite despair. Dr. Harold Sinclair delivered the opening address. He was older now, his hair entirely white, his voice carrying the weight of failures he had not prevented. We stand at the precipice of catastrophe, he told the assembly. And I must tell you honestly, we have no viable path forward. The blight continues to spread. Our countermeasures have proven inadequate. We face the very real possibility that, if I may interrupt, every head in the chamber turned toward the entrance. Dr. Amara Okonkwo walked toward the podium, her cane tapping a steady rhythm against the marble floor. Behind her came Elena Castillo, and behind Elena, barely visible in the crowd of dignitaries, came a thin man with a gray beard and wire-rimmed glasses, a man most people in this room had long since forgotten. "Dr. Okonkwo," Sinclair said, his composure cracking slightly. "This is highly irregular." "Circumstances are highly irregular," Amara replied. She reached the podium and turned to face the assembly. "I bring before this body evidence of a breakthrough that may, I emphasize may, offer a viable solution to the crisis we face. This evidence was developed independently by a researcher this institution once rejected." She gestured toward Marcus, who stepped forward into the light. The murmurs began immediately. Sinclair's face drained of color. Representatives leaned toward their translators, confirming they had heard correctly. "Dr. Marcus Vane was dismissed from this community 7 years ago. His research was deemed premature, unsubstantiated, dangerous. I am here to tell you that history may have rendered a different verdict." Marcus approached the podium. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "I have spent the past 7 years continuing the research I began before my dismissal, working alone, working in obscurity, working because I still believe, that science exists to serve humanity, not institutions." He activated a projection screen. The images that appeared showed his laboratory, his seedlings, and the unmistakable golden glow of cellular regeneration. "What you are seeing is a treatment that reverses the damage caused by the blight. It does not merely protect plants, it neutralizes the parasitic organism itself. I have tested it across multiple species. The results are consistent and reproducible." He advanced to the final image, a side-by-side comparison of infected crops without treatment and treated crops showing complete recovery.
"I offer this research freely," Marcus said. "No patents, no ownership. Every nation represented in this room has the ability to begin implementing this solution immediately. All I ask is that you give it the chance I was never given." The silence that followed seemed to last forever. Then Sinclair rose from his seat. His expression was unreadable. "Dr. Vane," he said, 7 years ago, I made a decision regarding your research that I believed was prudent, cautious, responsible." He paused, visibly struggling. "I was wrong." The murmurs intensified. Sinclair raised his hand for silence. "I was so concerned with protecting this institution's reputation that I failed to recognize what stood before me. A scientist willing to take risks, a researcher with a vision to imagine solutions beyond our conventional understanding." His voice broke slightly. "I owe you an apology that is long overdue. And more than that, I owe the world an explanation for why we do not already possess the tool you have created." He turned to face the assembly. "I move that this body immediately authorize independent verification of Dr. Vane's research and, pending confirmation of his results, begin emergency distribution protocols." The vote was unanimous. In the weeks that followed, Marcus's treatment was tested, verified, and deployed with unprecedented speed. Agricultural agencies on 6 continents began inoculating crops. Within 3 months, the blight spread had halted. Within 6, infected fields were recovering at rates previously thought impossible. The man who had been a ghost became, against his will, a celebrity. Journalists sought interviews. Universities offered positions. The same institutions that had rejected him now competed for association with his success. Marcus declined them all. "What will you do now?" Elena asked one spring morning. They were walking the fields of Rosie's farm, watching the first green shoots push through the thawing soil. The Vermont landscape seemed to glow with new possibility. "I don't know," he admitted. "I spent so long fighting to be believed. I never really planned what would happen if I succeeded." "Maybe that's the point." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Maybe success isn't about what comes next. Maybe it's just about proving you were worth believing in all along." He looked at her, this woman who had doubted him and defended him, who had left and returned, who had become the collaborator he never stopped needing. "I wasn't the only one worth believing in." Elena smiled. It was a small smile, tentative but genuine, and it reminded him of a night in a laboratory long ago when she had agreed to imagine the impossible. "Neither was I." Rosie Pemberton watched them from the farmhouse porch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, the same colors that had glowed in a hidden basement when hope was nothing more than a whisper. Some things take time, but anything worth growing is worth waiting for.
1 year after the summit, Marcus Vane stood in a greenhouse on the grounds of the National Institute for Agricultural Sciences. The building bore a new plaque, the Vane Castillo Center for Regenerative Agriculture. Elena had insisted on the hyphen. Marcus had insisted on her name appearing at all. Around them, rows of healthy crops stretched toward the glass ceiling. Wheat and corn and rice and vegetables of every kind, thriving under carefully controlled conditions that Marcus's research had made possible. "You know," Elena said, adjusting a monitoring device, "when you sent that letter last December, I almost didn't come. What changed your mind?" She considered the question. "You asked me to tell me if I was wrong. That was the first humble sentence you'd written in 7 years. I figured you'd finally learn something." Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the first one he'd allowed himself in a very long time. "I learned that being right isn't worth much if you're too proud to ask for help. And that second chances are the only ones that really matter." Outside the greenhouse, spring sunlight warmed a world that had nearly starved and was now improbably beginning to heal. The work continued. The seeds grew, and somewhere in the distance, a farmer looked at her recovering fields and whispered a word of gratitude to scientists she had never met. The light, Marcus thought, always returns. You just have to keep believing it will.